brokers out there that are selling shells will tell you, they can raise you, tens of millions of dollars, and it's a quicker way of going than an IPO or a registration. That really is a half truth. Nobody can raise money for you as a public vehicle unless you have certain requirements. In other words, you need to have a certain float in your stock. You need to have some revenues generating. You need to give people, the public, a reason to want to invest in your company, either to buy the stock in the open market or buy it directly from your company at a discount. So again, when you're approaching going public, make sure you get good SEC counsel and don't just listen to somebody that has a shell that they're peddling. Now, that's a reverse merger. Now, in 2012, the Jobs Act was passed to make raising capital easier for companies. And as part of that, they passed what's called Regulation A+. Now, that's a vehicle that companies can use. It's a filing with the SEC that you can use to raise up to $50 million every 12 months. And you can take money from accredited investors as well as non-accredited investors. You're allowed to advertise your Reg A offering in seminars, radio, TV, and a lot of other methods that you couldn't before the Jobs Act was passed. Now, the plus side of a Regulation A is, it is a vehicle to go public. However, you don't have to. You can go through the process of a Reg A to raise, 15 to 20 million, up to $50 million. But you don't have to get listed on, an exchange like NASDAQ or the New York. But it is a good idea if you're going through the process, the legal expense, the accounting, and you need audited financials. It's always a good idea to have the end game to be listed. So the process would be you would have your SEC counsel file an S1, a Form A1 with the SEC, to take your company through the Reg A process. Now, there's really no qualifying process with the SEC. It's usually takes maybe 60 to 90 days, and you become effective, which means you can start offering your securities, whether it's common stock or debt, other forms of equity preferred, to the public in general to invest in your company. So that's the Reg A Plus method of either going public or raising capital. Now, as far as raising capital, as I mentioned earlier at the top of the show, investors are really looking for the next Facebook, the next Google, as we all say in my business. They're looking for something that is going to give them an excellent return on their money. That's the reason they invest in public companies. So again, at the top of the hour, we talked about taking your company public. You need to really think long and hard about taking your company public and why you want to take it public. You need to do some serious thinking in your business sector, in your business in particular, is it attractive for somebody to want to buy your stock in the open market, call their stockbroker up and say, hey, I want to buy 100,000 shares of XYZ company. What's going to motivate them to want to do that? Well, it's going to be, what's your business model? What's the management? Is the management strong enough to execute on the business model? Do you have some revenues? I know there's a lot of stuff that's going on over the internet that anybody can go public whether you have revenue or not. In my professional opinion, and I've been doing this 25 years, I would not take a company public that's not generating at least $1 million to $2 million in revenue, because that really is one of the motivating factors for either individuals or institutional money to get behind a publicly traded company and want to invest. And certainly, if you're planning on getting off of the OTC market and going to a major exchange like NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, there are a lot of different requirements that NASDAQ has for you to list. In other words, you have to have so many shareholders. You have to have so much in revenue. You have to have so many shares in the float. The requirements go on, and these are some of the giveaways I have on the show today. So if you email me after the show at mikebrett@gmail.com, that's Mike Brett, BRETTE, @gmail.com. I've got a lot of reports, a lot of white papers that I will send to you. One of them is on the Reg A Plus process of going public. How to raise capital, through that process. Again, valuations, how to establish your valuation. All these elements are important for your company and for potential investors to come in. And also, I have the requirements for listing your company on NASDAQ. I have to laugh. I see on different websites and different press releases that companies put out, they're a 10-cent stock. That's considered a penny stock. Anything that's less than $5 is considered to be a penny stock, and institutional investors typically stay away from investing or supporting those type of companies. But I see these companies put out press releases, and they're a 10-cent stock, and they say, we made application to apply for NASDAQ. Now, come on. You do a little research into the company. They don't, first on the price, you have to be a $4 stock. And they're 10 cents, and they feel they're going to, in 6 months, they're going to be $4. How's that going to happen? You have to have over 2,000 shareholders, and most of them have maybe 100 to 200 shareholders. They can't meet the requirement. So I really don't know why they put out a press release that says they're making application to NASDAQ when you can tell by looking at their OTC market filings that they don't qualify now, and they're probably not going to qualify in 12 to 24 months. So again, going to a major listing, there's some requirements, but there's also the benefit of being on a listed exchange, and that is your access to capital. I always tell clients, look, go where the money is, and the money is with investment banks, FINRA broker-dealers, private equity, family offices, and the compliance department of these institutional firms, which have all the money, to go in and support a public stock in the open market, to invest in your company. The compliance department of these firms, these institutional investors, will not allow them to get involved with a company that's less than $5. So if you're considering taking your company public, your options are somewhat limited on how you're going to access capital if you're less than $5. Okay, so what do? Either your management, your board of directors, and you have sat down and figured out you want to go public through a reverse merger or some other method. Where do you access capital? There are firms out there, not institutional firms, but there are firms out there that provide what's called an equity line of credit or convertible debt. You need to be very, very careful about accessing that type of capital with your public company, because typically associated with equity lines of credit and convertible debt, convertible notes, typically it's a toxic type of financing. Now, what do I mean by that? Most companies that go public through the reverse merger process or haven't established a price of $5 or more and who can't get on a major exchange, they're kind of relegated to dealing with these other individuals or firms that have toxic financing. So the typical scenario will be you'll get a phone call from somebody and say, hey, we've been following your company. We have money available. We're investors. We'll give you a $10 million line of credit that you can draw down on over 36 months. What do you say? And we'll start with $100,000 now, and then the scenario would be whenever you want additional capital, you agree to sell us X number of shares at a discounted price. Now, this is where it becomes toxic. What these toxic firms do is they take your price. Let's say your stock's trading for 10 cents today. They typically do what's called a look-back period, which they'll look back either 10 days or 30 days to find out the lowest price of what your stock traded for. So let's say your current price today is 10 cents. They do the look back period, let's say 10 to 15 days, and they find out your stock was trading for 2 cents. That's the price they're going to offer to purchase your stock at a 50% discount. So now you're a 10-cent stock. They're agreeing to buy your stock at a penny, 50% of 2 cents. So you're so desperate for the money, you agree to the terms and conditions without really having an SEC qualified attorney look at their paperwork. So you sign it, you execute it, you send them X number of shares, and now you're in a scenario which we call a death spiral, which means now you've got a 10-cent stock, they're buying it for a penny, they're going to be selling it into the market for whatever price they can get above a penny, 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents, but they never sell it at your going market price. So what happens? Your stock price goes down, 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 down. There's dilution with your shareholders, and the only one who wins out on it or makes money is the toxic firm who gave you the equity line of credit and convertible debt. And the reason I mention all this, I know it might sound confusing at first, but again, I have white papers on the topic. I'm available for a telephone conversation or email consultations also if you're considering, taking your company public. I've been doing this 25 years. I know where, the good people are, the bad people. I know how to counsel you on what to do and what not to do. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't take my advice, or they take the advice of their own counselors and they end up getting hurt. But I'm telling you this not to scare you away from taking your company public. I think going public is an excellent strategy for your existing investors or shareholders. It's certainly a good vehicle for you as the founder at some point in time when you can liquidate some or all of your position to get some capital into your own pocket. So I think going public is viable for most businesses if they take the time to study the market and study the methods of going public. Now, one of the other ways that publicly traded companies can raise money, typically, your stock has got to be trading at that $5 level where you can bring institutions in. And there's a method called at-the-market financing, an ATM. So at-the-market financing. What that means is your stock is trading at $5. Institutions will come in and at a small discount, maybe a 5% discount off of that $5 price because of different fees involved, and it's called at-the-market financing. And you typically have a registration you've gone through, and they buy the stock directly from you, and they'll also support it. They won't be selling the stock into the marketplace to hurt the company. So that's called at-the-market financing, and it's typically available to companies that are on a major exchange, such as NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. I've done a number of at-the-market financings for an oil and gas company. We raised almost $20 million, and we had a number of New York investment banking firms come in at the market. We've had some investment banking firms here on the West Coast come in at the market, and it was attractive to them because the liquidity that we built into the stock price. We were able to do a number of road shows and different meetings that got the stock very liquid and got the stock price up to that $5 price tag that they were looking for. So that's called an at-the-market offering. You're listening to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michael Brett. Business Pulse Talk Radio is the heartbeat of business. We're all about business all the time. And just a way of a little bit of background, my company is called Small Cap Equity Advisors. We're a fee-based consulting firm, and we advise clients on a wide variety of transactional business matters, startup consulting, valuations for your business, reverse mergers, Reg A plus, using PIPE financing to raise capital for your public company, equity crowdfunding, Reg A plus, mergers and acquisitions, and we also have, over the 25 years, we built up a nice network of retail and institutional firms that will support your effort in taking your company public. And again, I mentioned I have white papers and I have other information. So if you email me at mikebrett@gmail.com, that's Mike Brett, B-R-E-T-T-E, @gmail.com, I can send you some information on valuations. I can send you information on doing a Reg A plus offering. I can send you information on doing a reverse merger. And we do have some shells that are available. I hate to use the word shell. It's got a bad connotation in the market, but vehicles, I'll use that word. We do have a number of publicly traded vehicles that are available for merger with your company. So we have this information available. It's available by email, and I can consult with you via email. If you're located in California, we can always do a face-to-face meeting also. Again, today's topic is taking your company public. It's not for the faint of heart. Believe me, it's an expensive process to go through. If you decide to do a Reg A plus offering, and you contact a securities lawyer, typically it's going to be around $65,000 for legal fees for a Reg A plus. Then you've got accounting fees, which could be as much as $25,000 because you need 2 years of audited financial statements. Even if your company hasn't had much activity in regard to revenue, you still need to have audited financial statements of the past 2 years. Now, I emphasize that point because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, a number of companies went public with a Reg A plus at a certain dollar amount, $5, $6, $7 a share. They get listed on NASDAQ, and within about 30 days or 60 days, their stock price drops by over 50%. Number of reasons for that. First off, they went public too soon. They didn't have revenue. Secondly, the valuation for the company was set way too high. And then so when investors finally do enough checking into the company, once the filings are done, they figure out, the valuation is just out of sight. So they start either shorting the stock or nobody is supporting the stock and the stock price drops. So NASDAQ now and the New York Stock Exchange have stopped taking companies for listing through Reg A plus unless they've had at least 2 years of seasoning, been in business 2 years with revenue. So again, no matter who you work with, whether you work with my firm, Small Cap Equity Advisors, or you work with somebody else you choose, make sure the reason you're going public is solid, your fundamentals are solid, you have revenue of, like I said, we're $1 million to $2 million in revenue at a minimum, that you have some kind of proprietary IP, intellectual property, some reason to give people, again, a reason to buy. And you look at it from your standpoint. Look at say, what would I do with this company if it was presented to me on this basis with facts and figures? Would I take my money and buy the stock in the open market? And if your answer is no, then you shouldn't take. That's one of the reasons you should not take your company public. Now, in last week's episode, we had a client on called Aptech, APPTECH, Aptech Corp, based in Carlsbad, California, and they're a publicly traded company. The stock symbol is APCX, and I'm a shareholder in that company. I've been consulting with them for about 6 years, and I ask you to take a look at it because you'll see the process of going public. You'll see the process of what's involved with a public company, what you need to do as far as press releases, and the things of that nature. So that's Aptech Corp. And look at our old video that was up last week also. It's also on the podcast. So again, going public is a tool that you should use. But like anything else, you should be very cautious. You should get excellent advice, independent advice. Don't take the advice of somebody that's has a vested interest in the vehicle that you're going to be acquiring. You need third-party information on making that decision. Excuse me. You've been listening to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michael Brett. And again, we have white papers on Regulation A+, the facts and figures and timeline that it would take to go public. We have information on reverse mergers, the cost and fees involved with something like that. We have information on the requirements for a NASDAQ listing. So if you did take your company public and you're an OTC, over-the-counter stock, and you want to get uplisted to NASDAQ, we've got the requirements that you're going to have to meet at a minimum to uplist your company. We also have information on how you can do an at-the-market financing so that you don't get snagged up in some of this convertible debt and toxic equity lines of credit. Now, having said that, not all convertible debt and equity lines are bad. You just have to look at the terms and conditions to make sure there's a floor price at what the company, the investor company, can convert their stock. If there's no floor, that means they could hammer the stock down to nothing, and they can still request stock from your company and still move that stock into the market. Well, we're about out of time here for this show, and I appreciate everybody tuning in. Next week, we have a very special guest coming into the studio. We're going to be live in studio. We have Pharma Green Biotech. It's a Canadian company that's in the hemp business with some very strong proprietary technology. Stock symbol is PHBI. PHB like boy, I. PHBI. And they're an exciting company. I'm a consultant to the company. They're going to be in talking about their product, and we're also going to be doing a series of road shows for them here in the United States. And even though they're a Canadian company, they are listed here on the OTC market. And we are working with that company to get them uplisted sometime next year to NASDAQ. So next week we're going to have an exciting show talking about Pharma Green, their technology in the hemp, supplying starter plants to growers of hemp product that are disease-free. And that's a very critical element, and I'll let the CEO, who will be in the studio next week, I'll let him explain that. Again, you've been listening to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michael Brett. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And again, don't forget to send me an email and request our white papers, or send me an email just if you have a question. Mike Brett, BRETTE, @gmail.com. I'm here to offer some assistance, but keep in mind it's limited because we are a fee-based consulting firm. We do charge for our services, but we have certain phone consultations that are at no charge, just so we can get a feel for what you're looking for and what you're trying to accomplish, and we advise you accordingly. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in to Business Pulse Talk Radio. I've been your host, Michael Brett. And again, tune in next week, Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time, on OC Talk Radio to listen to my new client, Pharma Green Biotech, stock symbol PHBI. Thank you for tuning in.
You've been listening to another example of Business Pulse Radio, right here on OC Talk Radio, Orange County's only community radio station.
Be completed is dialed. Please consult your directory.
I'm on the observation deck of the Empire State Building to demonstrate how much material Waste Management recycles. As North America's largest residential recycler, last year alone, Waste Management recycled 12.9 million tons. How much is that? Let's do the math. Carry the 6. It's enough to fill this building more than 27 times. With experience like that, we're bound to have a program that can help your business recycle. Talk to Waste Management or visit thinkgreen.com.
Can you hear? I'm not saying anything. That's why. Can you hear me? Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Okay. Let me get your email. Call your guest while we're waiting here. There we go. We're live. Allan, how do you say his name? Allan SIposs? SIposs, okay. And I do have another show at 11, so we got to get off right on time here. I'll probably have to hang up quickly with you guys. Hey, Allan, Paul Roberts with Branding Business Radio Show.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Good. I understand you're our guest here in a moment here.
I am, and I had a small change of plans, and I'm actually not in my office. I'm on my cell phone. Can you call me directly? It'll help to reduce the delay between.
Sure.
My cell is 949
949
861
861.
0182.
I'll call you right back. Bye. He's on his cell phone here. 94949 861 0182. Okay, you ready?
I sure am.
Let's get you on with Ryan and we'll go through what happens here. Hang on.
Okay.
All right, say hi to Ryan.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, good morning, Allan. How are you today?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
Great, thanks. Thanks for being a guest.
Excellent. Oh, looking forward to it.
So we're under a little bit of a time constraint. I have another show at 11, so we're going to go about 20, 25 minutes or so. And you'll just hear the intro. I'm going to put, you won't be on hold, so you just have to be quiet for a moment. And I will play the intro, and Ryan will bring you in, and off we go.
Sounds great.
We do stream it, well, not this one. We're going to record this one and play it later. That's right. And stories. We're always looking for stories. So the more the merrier. Everybody wants to give facts and figures, and the more you can tell real stories, that's what everybody loves. It takes away.
Okay, perfect. I'll do it.
Okay. Any other advice or questions, Ryan?
No, we're ready to roll.
All right. Let's get this stopped here. Okay. All right. So here we go. Everybody take a deep breath and find your intro. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Expert Opinion.
Oh, let's do that right. There's always a mistake, and I usually make it. Let's get this set up again here. Okay, so let's try it one more time. In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Expert Opinion, the branding business forum where leaders share their views, insights, and experiences from the world of B2B branding. And now, here's your host.
Hello, this is Ryan Rikus, and today's show is titled How to Look at Brand Strategy When Preparing a Business for Sale. We have a great guest, Allan SIposs, Managing Director of Keystone Capital Markets. They're a highly focused investment bank that provides sophisticated M&A and financial advisory services to middle market businesses. Allan has over 25 years of experience advising business owners on financing, business valuation, preparing and selling their business for the greatest possible returns. So I've known Allan for over 10 years and always really appreciated his perspective as it relates to the role brand and brand strategy plays in business success and appealing to strategic buyers. So if you'd like to learn the best practices on those topics, I'm sure you'll find some interesting insights from Allan. So let's get on to things here. Allan, thanks for being a guest on Expert Opinion.
My pleasure, Ryan. Happy to be with you.
Well, let me start off with one right down the middle here. I know it's very difficult to put a dollar value on a brand. There's been a lot of studies trying to do so, but from your perspective, as you're evaluating a business and considering the multiple, the valuation of it. How do you think about brand as it relates to and when you're advising a business?
The business is going to be. And so brand can play a really important role in that, in differentiating the business from competition, adding value, perception of value in the marketplace. And really, at the end of the day, a buyer is buying the level and certainty of future cash flows. And so the more the brand differentiates the business, the more it creates this protective moat around the business, the more valuable the company is going to be, because the certainty of those future cash flows will be higher and more protected. So brand can play a really important element. Now, that's the easy part. The harder part is determining how much value it truly adds, and that's going to be somewhat in the eye of the beholder. For some buyers, they will see brand as very important and a key focus of what they use to value a given target. Others may feel that the brand will need to be refreshed or repositioned down the road after they buy the business, and they're less focused on current brand and thinking about where the brand can be developed. And that will influence their thinking. But at the end of the day, what's really important to understand is brand is going to be a key determinant of value. It's going to help to differentiate the company in the eyes of customers, clients, and of course buyers when the time comes. And paying attention to that from an M&A or mergers and acquisitions perspective becomes very, very important.
Wow, I think that's a fantastic and succinct summary. So, considering that there is additional value in a brand that's well-defined, has a competitive advantage, for all the reasons that you just described, how early should an executive, owner, CEO think about their brand as when they're preparing the company for a potential sale?
Well, we like to say in our business that time is your friend. The sooner you begin preparing, the better. So we joke that you should begin thinking about a sale the moment you buy the business or the moment you start the business, because eventually you'll exit from the business in one form or another. Hopefully walking out the door with your head held high and a nice payday and moving on to the next chapter of your life, and hopefully it's not under duress or stress. So really, the sooner the better. It's extremely important to think about all aspects of value, and particularly brand and how it's going to play into value. And as you, I'm sure, well know, Ryan, the development of a brand, the implementation of a branding strategy takes time. And if you're rushed through that process, unfortunately, you often don't get the best results. So the sooner they start, the better, and the more attention they pay to it from the outset, the better.
Yeah, completely makes sense. And it absolutely does take time not only to develop the brand and change people's perceptions ultimately. And you have both the internal branding and the external. So the external, of course, is important to appeal to a buyer, but also the internal branding of getting the team aligned around a vision for the future and how to position the brand so it's unique, and then ultimately making a brand promise, but then ultimately the internal team has to keep that promise too. So as you're advising companies, do you also think about that in the area of internal branding and getting the team aligned?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, the brand becomes enmeshed with the culture and value proposition of the company. And, there are examples of companies that have a public-facing brand that is not internally accepted by the staff, and that becomes a disconnect. And it's so important that all the employees of the company are really on board with what the branding means to the customer, the outside world, as well as within the organization. All of that becomes very, very important to making it a cohesive message and a message that the ultimate customer really accepts and embraces. Very important.
Well, switching topics a little bit, one of the areas that we've been, a trend that we've seen is working with private equity firms who do roll-up strategies, where they'll look at a certain industry and they'll buy one company and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 companies kind of in the same area, and then initially just keep the brands independent, and then ultimately comes a point where it's time to roll them up into a brand strategy going forward, whether that's one brand and one dominant brand, and maybe there's product brands, but one dominant brand, or maybe one brand per channel or something like that. So that's an area that we get involved with quite a bit, as well as what we call brand architecture and developing a long-term roll-up strategy. So is that something that you guys get involved with as well?
Absolutely. The strategy of a private equity group buying an initial company, what's usually called a platform company, and then adding add-ons or new companies to that platform is a well-worn and time-proven strategy. Most private equity groups will buy companies with the objective of building value and selling the business in 5 years or less. There are exceptions, but typically it'll be 5 years or less. And back to what I said earlier, value is going to be driven by the level and certainty of future cash flows. So a private equity group comes in, they buy the business, they shed excess costs, they streamline operations, maybe they improve their supply chain management and make a few other adjustments that help to improve cash flows, and lo and behold, suddenly you have a company that's cash flowing at a higher level. So if the private equity group is focused on increasing the level of future cash flows by focusing on the brand in parallel with that, value can be increased as you get to the certainty of future cash flows. In other words, you can do all the things that I just mentioned, and the cash flow will increase, but alongside that, if the brand is being built and you're creating this differentiation I mentioned earlier, that's going to help to keep competitors out and better position the availability of that cash going forward, thus value goes up. Again, back to the fundamentals of the level of future cash flow and the certainty that those future cash flows will be achieved. That will ultimately be core to whatever a private equity group does. So that's the beginning of the story. And then as they begin to add in new portfolio companies to the platform, they're going to be looking at each of those companies with a mind to how can we leverage the brand that we've developed within the core business to get into new vertical markets or maybe new geographic markets or different products, different end users, all taking advantage of this core brand. And in some instances, they will look at the branding that the target company has done and do just the reverse. Gosh, how can this brand allow us to put our products through the acquired company's channel? We had a transaction a few years ago that involved a company in the pet food space, and the company was very active on social media. They had a very strong Facebook presence with lots of followers and really strong customer engagement through Facebook. The acquiring company did not have a good social media presence, and they saw the target as an opportunity to not only gain a new product line in a desired niche of the pet food space, but also an opportunity to leverage its social media into the other brands that it developed. And so after the acquisition, that core brand was levered into the Facebook presence that the target had and used that as a way to get new customers aware of its products. It worked beautifully and, again, resulted in higher cash flows and more protection of the brand.
Well, you mentioned private equity, you mentioned strategic buyers, and then there's also financial buyers who are buying an asset just for the financial benefit. And just thinking out loud here, as a company thinks about their future and looking at where they can maximize their return, I'm sure that a strategic buyer as well as private equity and the roll-up strategies is better than the financial. In other words, a financial might just buy an undervalued asset because they have something there, but they haven't done a very good job in branding or leveraging it. And there's a lot of hidden value. So I would imagine that as you're advising customers or clients who are thinking about their business and their brand and for a future sale 2, 3, 4 years out, thinking about how they can position the company, develop that brand, develop that compelling value proposition, the competitive differentiation, can actually add value to the business, right? And how to think about that in order to prepare and even identify potential buyers. You could almost position a company in that manner as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, you mentioned financial buyers versus private equity. We have seen a lot of activity within private equity groups and the values that they're offering on businesses that suggests that in many cases they're operating very much like strategic buyers. So they're looking at businesses with a mind towards how can they add value and position the business to ultimately be acquired by a strategic buyer. And the result is that in the marketplace, the valuation that private equity groups are paying are often at or even slightly above the strategic value that buyers are coming to the table with. So the split in the marketplace that we have seen historically between strategic versus private equity is less pronounced. There still can be a difference, but it's less pronounced. when you contrast a private equity group with a purely financial buyer, one that's only acquiring a company for the financial metrics, as you point out, there usually is a fairly significant difference because the purely financial buyer is not looking at some of the intangibles that you mentioned, like brand and other elements, but thinking, gosh, where can I cut costs? Where are there underutilized assets, et cetera? So there can be different levels of value attributed to the same company based on the lens through which each of these buyers are looking at it.
Yeah, makes complete sense. So I remember a recent report stating that 84% of the average S&P 500 business value is based upon its intangible assets. And just 40 years ago, that number was 17%. So clearly, the intangible assets beyond physical have a greater value in today's world. And as you just mentioned, brand is kind of related to the company's future ability to perform. And so brand is part of that intangible assets, but also intellectual property, and there are a number of different things that are associated with intangibles. How do you guys look at intangibles as you're putting a valuation on a company?
Sure. The rubber meets the road when the deal gets done and you see what final valuation is, right? That's where a buyer has stepped up to the table and monetized its perception of what intangible value is. It's often very difficult to isolate intangible value for some of the items that you mentioned, such as brand and IP and so forth. You know, we've seen situations where production capabilities or a technology or a market positioning will differentiate a given company from the competition and lead to a higher valuation as a result. So it just really depends on the specific situations at hand. Where there are very high value attributable to technology or IP, oftentimes you can value that based on discounted cash flow model or similar approach to try to estimate what the future cash flow will be associated with that element. But it can be very, very difficult. And as I said a moment ago, ultimately it's going to be what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller that'll indicate what the value of those intangibles are. And it can be all over the board depending on who the buyer is and how things have been positioned. A real quick story, a few years back, we sold a manufacturing business that was in the aerospace sector, and the seller had received an unsolicited offer from a buyer. It was a very attractive offer. They thought, gosh, let's just take this and go to the closing. And thankfully, their attorney recommended that they interview some investment bankers. They interviewed us and hired us, and we represented the company. We went out to the marketplace, spoke to a number of different buyers, initially got indications of value that were slightly above what the initial unsolicited offer came back at. And then we went through our process and got offers that were quite a bit higher. And ultimately, the buyer that put the first offer on the table, and I'll just put some numbers around it so you get a sense for context, the initial offer was $150 million. When we ran our process, we were getting offers in the low 200s. Ultimately, that first buyer that was at the table at 150 came back, and we sold the company to them for $305 million.
Wow.
So there's quite a premium associated with the intangible value that one buyer saw, but it was not until they had the competition of other buyers at the table that they really stepped up and sharpened their pencil. So sometimes it takes a little coaxing to get buyers to really pay for intangible value, but it's always there.
Yeah, great example, and an example of the benefit of your process as well. So well done.
Yep.
So another topic here, when we build brands, we always use research to guide decisions, recommendations, not only from our point of view, but also to give comfort to the executives as to they're making the right decision. So we go out to the marketplace, talk to customers, prospective customers if we can reach them, and we use a lot of that to really understand how the brand and company is perceived and then how to position in the future. Some of that research has also been very valuable when preparing a business for sale because it gives data and insight to a prospective buyer as to the validation of either the offering and or the future potential. Do you have any experience like that as well?
Yeah, I really do. The key tenet of any business is make the customer happy, and in order to effectively serve the customer, understand their needs, wants, and concerns, it's just vital to really be engaged and understand what they're looking for. And this can be accomplished through a number of means, including the research and engagement that you're talking about, But the more the business is engaged with the customer and the greater its understanding of what the customer wants, the more sticky that relationship will be. And then back to the same old thing again, the more certain those future cash flows, and thus the higher the value of that relationship. Absolutely. Very important stuff.
All right, cool. So another area that is a hot topic, and that is around culture, but also what we call guiding statements of purpose, vision, and mission. And purpose is why we exist, vision is what we aim to achieve, and mission is how we're going to achieve it. So the benefit of these are primarily internally to align and inspire internal teams, but we've also found that it gives some investors clarity of direction, and everything's really well defined. So the executive team is very clear on what they're trying to accomplish. Things can be measured, and you can understand how far you're along on that path. Give me your perspective of that approach.
Yeah, I think having a clear internal culture that communicates the values and the mandate of the company is extremely important. And the more defined that is, back to what you said, the more defined that is and clear that is, the more I think values have comfort in what the company's current engagement is and current strategy is in the marketplace. So that will help get clarity around how that fits in within their strategy if it's a strategic buyer, or how it might serve as a platform or tuck-in if it's a private equity buyer. So getting a clear sense for that, communicating it within the organization in a way that engages employees and other constituents within the organization, very, very important. All of that becomes part of the intangible that makes a company A with that more valuable than company B without it. It becomes very important, so I agree with you.
All right, cool. Hey, we're almost out of time, so we just got a couple of final questions here. Who should own the brand? The CEO, the lead marketing person, sales, someone else? Who, in your perspective, should own the brand?
In my opinion, ultimate responsibility for the brand lies with the CEO. However, typically there are a number of key people within the organization that influence and may take ownership of the brand, including CMO and other marketing officers. At the end of the day, every employee of the company should have an interest in the development and protection of the brand. And back to what you were asking a moment ago about culture and how the organization communicates that internally, I think that becomes extremely important. But my opinion is CEO is the owner of the brand and the director, and ultimately the person who should be the direction or create the direction for the brand and own it.
Yeah, completely agree. They have to take ownership and also agree with your topic or your comment about everyone in the company needs to be able to deliver that brand promise. So that's why the clarity of communicating what the brand promise is, the purpose, vision, mission, allows everybody the guidance and doesn't require a lot of oversight to be able to deliver it. So completely agree with that. Okay, so we're almost out of time. Any final thoughts, trends, important topics that relates to brand strategy and positioning and preparing a company for sale?
Well, what I would add in closing is, the path of branding or refreshing a brand is extremely important, and a seller is going to latch on to that and attribute value to it. And there are numerous examples of products that have been rebranded in a hasty or less than optimal manner, and unfortunately, the outcome can sometimes hurt the brand rather than the original brand that was in place. So, I think in all instances, it's really important for the company to